All right, so in this video, the home front and the results of World War One. If you're watching this video, you already watched me go over just the World War One in general when we talked about the Western Front and the Eastern Front and the Allies versus the Central Powers and all of the weapons and artillery and gases that were used during World War One. So this time we're going to talk a little bit about the home front, and then we're going to talk about the results of World War One. The individual battles in World War One are not as important as they will be in World War Two. So I know it sounds like we kind of like breeze through it. All you really got to know is the leading factors, or everything leading up to World War One is extremely specific, and you got to understand how imperialism is a factor and militarism is a factor leading to World War One. And you got to know the different sides, and you got to know that in the beginning, the Central Powers were winning, and then the United States gets involved in the war in the last year-ish and kind of turns things around, and then all of a sudden the Allies win at the end. But let's talk a little bit more about the home front and the mentality of war. That's more important than how this war was carried out is really more important than the individual battles in World War One. So let's talk about total war on the home front. So we got the Eastern Front, we got the Western Front, and when all a front is just where usually the battles are fought. And there's this new idea of calling the battles calling the civilians who are working in the factories, who are sending food and shipments and weapons over. They're considered the home front. They're considered just as important as the soldiers on the front lines. That's why it's called a front. This World War One, as we talked about, is considered a total war. A total war means that the countries, they're devoting all of their resources to the war effort. The governments are going to take control over pretty much almost the entire economy. The governments are going to tell their factories what to produce and how much. We're going to take factories that were for, steel production or something, and then they're going to convert those factories to making weapons or making war supplies. Everything that would normally make the stuff that we want and need, like clothes, are now going to be used to make things for war. And nearly every able-bodied civilian was put to work. So essentially, we're going to almost have zero unemployment during wartime because everyone's needed. And if you don't have a strong home front, you're not going to win. The soldiers on the Eastern and Western Front are not going to win in a total war if they don't have any more weapons, if they don't have enough food and water. You're going to lose. And so the home front is just as important, if not more important, than the soldiers on the front lines in what we call a total war. And in a total war, because the factories are that important, because the workers who are not in the military, just people going to a factory to work, they are considered targets at the same time. That's where we saw the German unrestricted warfare. Yes, the Lusitania was a cruise liner. And yes, it probably was. I mean, the British and the Americans denied it, but it was true. The Germans were right in that the Lusitania, this cruise liner, had weapons being transported secretly. But thousands of people were not military. Thousands of people were civilians, and they were hit by a submarine without any warning. And so that was considered barbaric, and that was considered targeting our civilians. But that's what the Germans did, but that's even what we did as well. The Allies did. That's the only way to win the war, is if you take out their home front as well. So because it takes a massive effort on behalf of the people at home, we're going to see major propaganda. When we say propaganda, we mean one-sided information designed to persuade people to feel or think a certain thing. So only one side. You don't get the other side. And propaganda, I know we like to think, I mean, every government's going to use it on both sides, the allies and the central powers. But I mean, I would argue, and historians would argue, that the democratic nations use propaganda even more than the non-democratic nations, because in a democracy, you have a right to freedom of speech. You have a right to oppose what your government wants, and that's dangerous in wartime, where we need everyone to be on the same side. The Americans were asking people to ration how much food they ate and how much they consumed. Save more for the people abroad, for our soldiers who are fighting for our freedom. Nowadays, if the government were to create a rationing thing, I mean, it just makes people up in arms, like, how dare you tell me what to do? But rationing was considered patriotic. And so there would be all these things like, let's look at these, some of these are very famous. I want you for U.S. Army. This is Uncle Sam, very patriotic. London, same kind of idea, same kind of pointing to you, so you feel like you're hearing the call. My daddy bought me a government bond of the Third Libertarian Loan. Did yours? That's very manipulative to have a little girl saying that. You were supposed to buy these bonds, and essentially you get paid back much, much later in life, but the government needed a lot of money because war is very expensive. And so they needed the money now, promising to pay people back plus interest later. And sometimes you buy a bond knowing that when you cash it out, you'll give that to your grandchildren or something. But this is a very manipulative thing to do. So anyways, we're going to see in a total war a ton of use of propaganda, especially amongst the democratic nations. We're also going to see censorship. So in a democracy, you can be against the war. I mean, we're going to see it every single time. You can be for it or you can be against it. And it's dangerous in some ways if there's a major resistance in the middle of the war, because it could lead to our own soldiers dying and losing. And so what we're going to see is these governments going to censor. To censor means to shut down. It means no freedom of speech, essentially. So they're going to suppress anti-war activity, sometimes forcibly. Sometimes news about the war. If the Allies or the Central Powers, I mean, censorship's on both sides, no one wants to say at the Battle of the Somme how many people died so quickly, because then when that goes back home, people are going to feel like, well, we might as well give up, right? These countries, they're going to only tell their people and their civilians who are working really hard for the war effort that they are winning. The Germans, at the end of this, when they lose, the German people are so surprised they almost don't understand it or believe it, because they've been told the whole entire time that they were winning. And so that's kind of almost important for the home front. It's not important. Well, it's not good or bad. It is what happened. And what we're going to see at the same time period is this total war effort is going to target minorities in your population that these countries think are disloyal to the country that they're living in. And we're going to see that in America. America is going to take Japanese citizens that's World War II, I apologize, but Japanese American citizens, like I'm an American citizen, if you're an American citizen, like you have specific rights, they're going to take citizens that just happen to be Japanese and put them in internment camps to keep an eye on them, because everyone's worried that they're being disloyal. That's going to happen in World War II. The Armenian genocide, you may not have heard it before. It was, let's see, I want to show you a picture of a map. One second. Well, I can't find it, but anyways, the Armenian genocide. Armenians are a ethnic minority within the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire was on the same side as the Austrians and the Germans. The Ottomans were a central power, so they were against the British, the French, the Americans, and the Russians. And the Armenians were Christian, And because they were Christian, people thought they were disloyal and that they were helping the Russians, who were also Christian. Remember, most of the Ottoman Empire was Muslim. And so they were a religious minority, and the Ottomans accused them of being disloyal, even though there was no evidence of the Armenians being disloyal, and forced the Armenians to migrate on foot to a different part of Turkey. Now, the Ottoman Empire was going to always say, well, they needed to be moved for the war effort, but they had to go through deserts and terrain on foot, and a quarter of these people died. It was a death march. It was essentially a genocide. Because the Ottomans were thinking that these people, this minority, was being disloyal to their war effort. And Hitler even says no one remembers the Armenians. I think that just goes to show that the total war effort was not really questioned during this time period when everyone's just fighting to win the war. And no matter, even the atrocities they commit against their own people are kind of going unnoticed. And of course, the biggest parallel is the Germans later doing it in World War II in the Holocaust against their Jews. But it is an unfortunate result of many total war efforts, and hopefully people will do better about it in the future. But in the midst of the war, lots of governments commit some major atrocities against their own people because of this idea of total war, and that the home front is, if not more important than the soldiers out there. All right, so let's keep going. The government and industry. Again, like I said before, the government owns everything. The government takes over the economy. The government today in our economy, in our capitalistic society and democracy, is not supposed to control most of the economy. It's only supposed to control the public part, which is schools and things like that. But you're going to see the government, like I said before, telling factors what they need to produce, how much they need to produce for the war effort. Every factory is going to be transitioned to making military supplies and war supplies. And women are, for the first time, going to be used like never before. We're going to see thousands of women replace men in factories, in offices, in shops. They're going to build tanks and munitions, and they're going to pave streets, and they're going to run hospitals. They also kept the troops supplied with clothing and weapons. So women are going to show what they're really capable of for the first time, and they're going to get this opportunity because so many men are leaving to go fight in the war. All right, so one second. So again, this is just a chart, percentage of women and men in employment. So this is 1914, the beginning of the war. Women to men, in employment. Let's see. You can see women's numbers are increasing significantly by the end of World War I. 24 to 37. So now women make up 37% of all workers by the end of the war. Now that number goes back down after the war because all the men come back and they want their jobs back, but not to the same levels as before. And so it's just it is the kickstart. It does regress after the war, but women now have shown that they are capable of much more than men originally thought. All right, so let's go on to Germany. And Kaiser Wilhelm is the leader of Germany, and he's been fighting World War I at this point. Let's pretend this is just 1917. And then he's the one who, sent the Zimmerman telegram, essentially asking Mexico to start a war with America, and America's not happy with that. America joins in 1917, and after America joins, they fill in the ranks of the Allies and really start to turn things around and start to defeat the Allies quickly. And Kaiser Wilhelm II realizes he's going to lose. We're first going to see the Central Powers begin to crumble. The Bulgarians are going to surrender. Then the Ottomans are going to surrender. And then we're going to see a revolution in Austria-Hungary, which is going to bring that to an end. And so in Germany, the soldiers and the public are going to turn on the Kaiser, and he's going to be forced to abdicate, which means to step down. All right, so let me go back real quick, just a tad, to the Central Powers losing. And like I said, the United States, they came in, and the United States has they didn't have the greatest soldiers, the most well-trained soldiers. They just had a lot of them, and the United States has the most powerful, wealthy economy. And the Germans, they just could not keep up with the supply that the Americans were now giving the Allies. And it was clear that the Central Powers and that Germany was going to lose. Now, you got to keep in mind, during the total war effort of propaganda, the German government had been telling their German citizens over and over again, we're going to win, we're going to win, we're winning, we're winning. And so when the German government came back and said, we just lost, people were very, very confused. So hold off on the democratic government real quick for a second. Actually, you know what? I can edit this. 1 second. Get rid of this. There's this thing called the armistice. So Germany has to sign an armistice according to the Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. And Woodrow Wilson is the president of the United States, and he comes up with the 14 points, which means everyone needs, this is the peace treaty, and everyone needs to, this is just his outline for achieving a just and lasting peace. It's going to end secret treaties. It's going to allow for freedom of the seas, free trade, and reduce national armies and navies, and fairness towards colonial people. And the suggestion of changing borders and creating new nations, and this big idea of self-determination, meaning allowing people to decide for themselves what government they wish to live, under what government they wish to live. And we'll get back to that real quick. But so Germany, they had to sign this armistice, which is a peace agreement. And according to Wilson's 14 points, they had to transition away from an empire and really more towards a democratic government. So at this point in time, there was only a couple major parties within Germany. One of them was the Socialist Party. And it looked like the Socialist Party was the one calling for the armistice, creating a democratic government. And there was this stereotype that a lot of socialists were Jews. And that's not necessarily true at all. But so to the German people who had been told, you're winning, you're winning, you're winning, now you're losing, and now somehow you guys lost, or somehow we lost, and now we've called an armistice, and the socialists have called an armistice, and now they're the ones in power, moving us towards more democratic government. It looks like these socialist Jews have stabbed us in the back. That's the main theory. That's kind of how it looked to a lot of Germans. And like I said before, during this time period, it was quite often the case that during a total war effort, that people would be very suspicious of the minorities within their own country of being disloyal to their war effort. Because the Germans, they felt like they were winning, and somehow they ended the losers of World War I with the socialists now in charge. So they felt like it was the socialist Jews that stabbed them in the back. That's going to be very important for World War II. So let's move on to the Big Four, the Paris Peace Conference. The Big Four are the United States, France, Great Britain, and Italy. So those are the four allies that essentially were on the winning side. Russia, which was on the Allied side, remember, they had to pull out of the war because of a Russian Revolution. So Russia was not represented at the Paris Peace Conference, which is going to lead to some major resentment later. But Woodrow Wilson of the United States was calling for a series of proposals known as the 14 points. And there's 14 of them, obviously, and it's an outline for how we can prevent another major world war. And the biggest one of those 14 points is this idea of self-determination. During imperialism, one of the bigger causes of World War I was the fight over Africa and the scramble for Africa and all these competition for colonies to make an empire. And it created all these people who don't have a say in their own government. So maybe if we can get rid of that and just allow the people to determine who they want to be governed under, and take that element of competition away, maybe we won't have another major world war. He essentially wanted to create also a League of Nations. The League of Nations was the idea of creating an organization that could peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts. You know, these are the nations that belong to the League of Nations, and if there's any major conflicts in the future, let's all meet and discuss and come to diplomatic solutions rather than going to another world war. Ironically, Woodrow Wilson was the one who pushed forth this idea, but in the United States, in order to sign a treaty, one person does not, in our system of checks and balances, is not allowed to sign an international treaty himself. He can propose it, but it's up to our United States Congress to ratify the treaty. And there just wasn't enough of public support for the League of Nations. And the United States has not joined the League of Nations, which is going to be a major mistake and one of the main reasons we see World War II. But the European nations did create the League of Nations to prevent another world war, and it will later fail because the United States doesn't join, one of the most powerful countries in the world. But in the League of Nations, we're also going to see, the League of Nations is the league. It's the organization that is going to prevent another major world war, in theory. But the peace conference, the peace treaty, was called the Treaty of Versailles. And the Treaty of Versailles forced Germany and punished Germany the most. Now, you got to remember, did Germany start this world war? It's kind of up in the air. It's debatable. It's not clear that they absolutely did. In World War II, it is very clear. Hitler invaded Poland. Bam. He started the war. Remember, if you think back to the Serbians and the Serbian nationalists, they assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary had a blank check from Germany to do whatever they wanted and gave this Austrian ultimatum that they knew the Serbians would not agree to, and the Serbians didn't, and then the Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, which got Russia involved. It really was not Germany that started. They aided the beginning of war. This war could have been a localized war if it weren't for Germany. But Germans felt like this was very unfair. Under the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans were forced to take responsibility. They were given the war guilt, and they had to agree to take on the war guilt. Let's see. And this was very, taking on the war guilt was very humiliating for the Germans. It's going to lead to lasting resentment. Germany is also going to have to demilitarize. It's going to have to decrease its military significantly to keep Germany in check. And the idea is, they're making Germany sign this so that Germany never does this again. It was France specifically, the French prime minister, that really wanted Germany to demilitarize, since they were the ones that were fighting the trench warfare. They share a border with Germany. The French asked for a demilitarized not a no man's land, but what it's called, I never know how to pronounce. Alsace-Lorraine and the Rhineland. They want that back from Germany, and it's right on the border right here. and because they want a little bit extra land to keep Germany out to protect from them. They're also going to force the Germans to pay reparations. And reparations are the cost of war. The Germans are going to have to pay back a lot of money to the Allies because the war is very expensive, and they say, you know, because you started it, you now have to pay for the war. Well, no one can pay for this war over any period of time, and it's unusually harsh as well. So really, all the Germans, they're forced to sign this. They have no voice, obviously, since they lost. And they just view this whole thing as a punishment that is way, way, way too harsh. And this is going to be a major, like the over harshness of this treaty, it's going to be a major reason why Hitler comes to power. So as a result of World War I, all of the major empires within Europe are just wiped out. The German Empire is gone. It's now forced to be a democracy. Austria-Hungary, according to this peace conference, has to break up. It is no longer allowed to be together. The Ottoman Empire, which was already weak, gone. It's now going to be split into a billion different Slavic, Baltic nations. Balkan nations, not Baltic. Under this Ottoman Empire, like I just said, what we're going to see is these European countries are going to step in, the Allies, the British, the French, and they're going to create mandates out of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans essentially are going to give up most of all of their former empire. They're only allowed to retain Turkey, which is right there. And the Ottomans are going to lose all Southwest Asia, and it's going to be turned into mandates instead of independent nations. There is this idea that these countries or these nations they're too young, they're too fresh, they're not going to be governed by themselves. They need someone else to fill the vacuum to govern them. So the British, they take Palestine, they take the Jordan, and they take Iraq. So let's see. The pink is British territory now, mandates, and the green is French. So the French take Syria and Lebanon right here, and they turn those into mandates. So this Paris Peace Conference is really not following the 14 points of, you know, self-determination. In fact, it's creating more colonies, essentially, more territories of lesser developed peoples, countries being controlled by France and Britain. These countries like the British and the French, they're imperialist, and what they're going to try to do is they're going to try to extend their sense of imperialism over the parts of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire that lost territory to the Ottoman Empire, to the German colonies, but really at this point in time, the age of imperialism is over. The British and the French, they're going to extend it a little bit longer. But by World War II, we're going to see that the age of imperialism is absolutely over, and they're going to lose their control over many of these other territories. All right, so results. The League of Nations, Germany in World War I. Sometimes we call the League of Nations, someone noted, it's a peace built on quicksand. Essentially, the quicksand is going to give away, and in a little bit more than 2 decades, all these treaties and this legacy of bitterness is going to plunge the world into another world war. So the League of Nations was a weak peace that really only led to the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles is the peace, but the League of Nations that it created was too weak without the Americans as a part of it. If you're trying to enforce all these rules on Germany and you don't have a strong power to keep Germany in check, then what we're going to see is Germany is just going to get stronger and stronger anyways. And America is not a part of it. And what we're going to see is the League of Nations instead is just going to appease Germany because nobody wants another world war. So that's going to be the weakness of the League of Nations and the United States not joining it is going to be a major cause for World War One. Sorry, for World War Two. And Germany itself is just extremely bitter, extremely vulnerable now. They feel like the Jews stabbed them in the back. They were winning, and now all of a sudden they're not, and they can't understand why. And eventually, we're going to see in between World War One and World War Two, a Great Depression that is worldwide, and Germany is already going to be in so much debt to other nations. They are going to be hyperinflated during the Great Depression, and people's lives are going to suck. And one man just starts to, with a lot of charisma, starts to make speeches, and he rises to the top by saying, the reason we lost was because of the Jews. And people are very vulnerable to, it's very easy to blame your problems on somebody else, especially when everyone feels so terrible. And Hitler kind of takes advantage of that really low morale and rises back to power after this time period. And nobody's keeping Germany in check. Germany's very bitter about the blame, and eventually we're going to get World War II. Casualties of World War I, 8.5 million dead, 21 million wounded, 7 million permanently disabled, another 27 million dead because of the flu, because of disease. So war dead is different than disease dead. This is going to create what we call, at least in America, if not more worldwide, the lost generation. There's going to be so many men who are gone from one generation, and people are going to be very disillusioned with industrialization. They thought for a long time, wow, this is just increasing our standard of living, making things cheaper, leading to progress. But when you look at these pictures, you're thinking, a lot of people are thinking, wow, like this is what we've done to our own society with industrialization. We now have warfare that is more destructive, and this is terrible. So let's see. Let me go back to this. Allied powers, they lose about. This is just more charts. How many people were mobilized and how many people died. So the Allies had 22 million people die. The Central Powers, I know you can't see, but I can see 37 million people. 37.5 million people. So millions and millions of people died within 4-ish years. Looking at the charts, Russia faced the most casualties. The United States, of course, faced the least. They were actually right beneath this line. But remember, the United States only joined in the last year. But Germany and Austria-Hungary lost a lot. France lost a lot in the trench warfare. Britain lost a lot. But it was mostly, Russia just throws peasants into the war. And people were very disposable to the Russian Empire. But Germany was fighting that two-front war. Lots and lots of death. But on the plus side, the total war effort really created so much wealth for the United States. They had the strongest economy after World War One because it had been running so efficiently and it was so productive for the war effort. And we're going to see the Roaring '20s, where we see movie theaters and we see supermarkets and we see jazz and we see all this wonderful stuff. This is the Great Gatsby era in the United States. And then the Great Depression is going to hit, of course. So the results, a lot of the African soldiers in the age of imperialism, and even in India as well, they joined the war effort and they helped their colonial imperial powers. They fought in the war themselves, and a lot of them die as well. And they're really going to be fighting for their self-determination after World War One. They are very upset that the Allies are not taking into consideration their desire for independence after they sacrificed their own lives to help the Allies win. So the fight for independence is going to continue. They're not going to get it yet, so I don't want you guys to think they're getting their independence yet. But they will eventually after World War after World War II. And women, as we talked about, they are finally going to get their suffrage, the right to vote. In the United States, they in this? They're not even in this. But the United States, I believe the date is 1920. So the war ends in 1918. The women will get it by 1920. I believe, I can't remember which amendment, 19th or 20th Amendment. But the women have proven their worth as strong citizens during the total war effort, which is a little silly, but they finally get the right to vote. All right, so that's it for World War I. The next lecture or two will be on the Russian Revolution. Go back, take notes, go back and make sure you understand the big ideas. Do not just make sure you only have written this, because it's like if you just write down results women instead of getting the right to vote, it would be very useless. So make sure you go back and watch. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.